This is the face of a queen, a mother, a symbol of power and spirit. But this face was stolen, chained, auctioned, displayed, worshipped, but never returned. Once it lived in a royal palace in Benin. Then it was taken by force, carried across the sea, locked behind cold museum glass. Benin City burned. Soldiers marched, families searched for what was lost, and children grew up looking at empty places where their history once stood. This is the story of how it happened, the story of how Europe stole Africa's greatest art treasures. African art is not just art, it is a tool of the spirit. It guides people, it teaches, it protects, it connects the living to those who came before. African art holds memory. It keeps the stories of families, kingdoms, and ancestors alive. It is also power. Kings ruled with it. Communities used it to make decisions and to honor their leaders. And African art is a map of the universe. Every carving, every mask, every bronze, every stone line in an old city, all of it carries a message about how life works, how time moves, and how people should live with each other and with the world. As one African historian once said, in Africa, art breathes. It carries spirit. Now, let us follow one piece of this living spirit, a single object that will guide our story. The ivory mask of Queen Idia. Her mask was stolen in 1897, taken from a burning city, carried away by soldiers, sold in London, locked in the British Museum for more than a century. Today, it stands as a symbol of what Africa lost and what Africa is fighting to reclaim. This mask will be our compass. Its story will lead us through the truth of how Europe stole Africa's greatest treasures. The Kingdom of Benin was one of the greatest powers in West Africa, a rich and organized empire, a place of skilled artists, wise leaders, and deep tradition. Its bronzes were more than art. They were history written in metal. They showed kings and queens. They showed battles, ceremonies, and the story of the kingdom itself. Each piece was a record, a library, a living memory. But in 1897, everything changed. The British Empire prepared an attack. They called it a punitive expedition, but it was not punishment. It was a plan to take the city and take its treasures. British forces marched toward Benin. They came with guns, fire, and orders to destroy. The night was filled with smoke. The great palace burned. Bronzes were pulled from their places, torn from walls, taken from sacred rooms. When the fire stopped, the kingdom had lost more than a city. It had lost its heart. More than 4,000 artifacts were stolen. They were carried to the coast, shipped across the ocean, and sold in London and other European cities. The money helped pay for the attack that caused the destruction. Many of these treasures ended up in European museums, and among them was the mask of Queen Idia, a symbol of Benin's strength, a symbol of a mother's power and the kingdom's wisdom. In those museum halls, her face became famous, but it was a fame built on loss, a fame born from the pain of a kingdom that was violated, burned, and robbed. And so, we return to the mask of Queen Idia. Her calm face tells us everything, not just what was taken, but what must one day return. In the highlands of Ethiopia stood the fortress of Maqdala. It was the stronghold of Emperor Tewodros II, a place of pride, faith, and royal tradition. Inside Maqdala were some of Ethiopia's most sacred treasures, tabots, holy objects that represent the Ark of the Covenant, illuminated manuscripts written by hand over centuries, crowns of emperors, shields carried by warriors, royal clothing worn in ceremonies and on the battlefield. These were not simple items. They were the soul of a kingdom. They held the history of a people, their faith, their art, and their memory. But in 1868, tragedy came. After Emperor Tewodros took his own life to avoid capture, British troops stormed the fortress. They broke into the royal treasury. They opened the churches. And they took almost everything they could carry. It became the largest single-day looting of African treasures by a Western power. More than 500 manuscripts vanished into British hands. Sacred tabots were taken too, objects so holy that even today they are not allowed to be displayed in public. They remain locked away in British museums, kept out of sight and far from home. For over a century, Ethiopia has asked for their return. Their request is simple: give back what was taken. Give back what was never sold, never traded, never given. Ethiopian priests still speak of this pain. One elder said softly and with deep sorrow, "A tabot is a soul, and a soul must return home." In West Africa, the Asante Empire stood as one of the most powerful kingdoms of its time. The Asante people were masters of statecraft, tradition, and ceremony. They were also the guardians of gold, gold that carried deep spiritual meaning, not just wealth. Their treasures were not simple ornaments. They were symbols of divine kingship. Crowns, swords, bracelets, and royal stools were all made with purpose and belief. At the heart of the kingdom was the golden stool. It was not a seat for any human king. It was the spiritual throne of the Asante nation itself. It held the soul of the people. It was sacred, untouchable, and protected with absolute devotion. But the arrival of the British Empire brought conflict. In 1874, 1896, and again in 1900, war broke out between the Asante and British forces. Each time British troops entered Kumasi, they stormed the royal palaces. They broke into sacred rooms. They seized crowns that had been worn for generations. They took swords used in ritual and ceremony. They gathered rings, necklaces, and royal ornaments. In 1874 alone, the British looted so much gold from Kumasi that it filled tons of cargo. Gold that held history. Gold that held spirit. Gold that held identity. Some of these treasures were melted down. Some were sold in European markets. And others now sit behind glass in museums far from the land that created them. But the loss was deeper than objects. As one Asante elder once said, they took more than gold, they took our aura. Because in the Asante world, gold was not just metal, it was life, it was memory, it was the shine of a people's soul. As Europe grew its empires, it also built great museums. The British Museum opened in 1753. The Louvre became a public museum in 1793. Germany created the Berlin Ethnological Museum in 1873, and Belgium opened the Tervuren Museum in 1897, filled with objects taken from the Congo. These museums were built during the same period when European powers were expanding across Africa. They did not rise from curiosity alone. They rose from empire. They gave empire a story to tell. A story that said Africa was a place to be studied, controlled, and collected. These institutions claimed they were protecting art, but many of the objects inside them were taken by force, and the museums helped justify that force by showing Africa as something to be owned, not understood. Inside these museums, sacred African objects lost their meaning. Power figures from the Congo Basin, Nkisi Nkondi, were pulled out of their shrines and called fetishes. Holy objects were treated as strange tools, not as living symbols of spirit and community. Yoruba masquerade masks, used in dances of power and connection, were labeled primitive ritual objects. Objects of great skill and deep meaning were placed behind glass as if they belonged to no one. Even worse, many African works were displayed without the names of the artists who made them. In European art, the names of painters and sculptors were celebrated, but African creators were hidden. Their genius was taken and their voices erased. Yet in private studios, Europe's most famous artists looked closely at African work. Picasso studied African masks. Matisse collected African sculptures. Modigliani shaped his style from the long lines and deep eyes of African forms. They found inspiration in Africa. They learned from Africa. They changed modern art because of Africa, but they rarely gave credit. Europe rejected African genius in public, while secretly drinking from it in private. The theft of African heritage did not happen in only a few places. It spread across the whole continent. Every region, every kingdom, every coastline felt the reach of empire. Let us move through these stories one after another to see the true scale of what was taken. In North Africa, the looting was early and intense. Egyptian mummies were ground into powder and sold in Europe as paint and medicine. Ancient obelisks, carved by hand thousands of years earlier, were lifted from their homes and carried to London, Paris, and New York. In Nubia, treasure hunters blasted pyramids apart with explosives, destroying history in their search for gold. In Central Africa, entire traditions were uprooted. Spiritual art from the Congo basin was seized during harsh years of Belgian rule. Fang masks, once used in important ceremonies, were taken to France and displayed as curiosities. Chokwe and Luba regalia, symbols of kingship and deep wisdom, were carried to Portugal and locked away. In East Africa, colonial rule brought its own wave of loss. Maasai spears and shields were taken by British soldiers as trophies of war. Kikuyu ceremonial regalia disappeared into private collections. Manuscripts from the Swahili coast, filled with poetry, history, and science, were seized and shipped overseas. In southern Africa, the damage was just as deep. Artifacts from Great Zimbabwe, a powerful city of stone, were removed and scattered across Europe. During colonial wars, Zulu and Xhosa, royal items were taken from captured leaders, stripping families of symbols that had lasted for generations. San Rock art panels carved into stone walls for thousands of years were cut out and transported to European museums, and the islands were not spared. In Madagascar, royal regalia of the Merina Kingdom was taken by French forces and now sits in European collections. From the Comoros, Islamic manuscripts rich with history and learning were carried to Paris. All of these stories remind us of one truth. The loss was vast. The theft was wide. No part of Africa was untouched. This was not a few objects or a few kingdoms. This was a whole continent whose memory was taken piece by piece. For many years, African nations stayed patient. They waited, they asked politely, they hoped the world would listen. But now, the time of silence is over. Africa is asking for its soul back. Nigeria demands the return of the Benin Bronzes. Ghana calls for its royal gold. Ethiopia asks for its sacred tabots and ancient books. The Democratic Republic of Congo asks for the treasures taken under Belgian rule. Senegal speaks for West Africa's lost heritage. Across the continent, scholars, curators, and leaders are standing together. They are writing reports, meeting world leaders, and building new museums ready to receive what was stolen. But Europe does not release its grip so easily. Many museums resist these calls. The British Museum is blocked by its own law. The British Museum Act of 1963, created to stop objects from being returned. Others give excuses. We must preserve the objects, they say. It is better for the world if everything stays in one place. If we return one thing, we will have to return everything. Excuses meant to delay. Excuses meant to protect empire's memory, not Africa's truth. Yet the world is changing. Some breakthroughs have already begun. In 2022, Germany returned many Benin Bronzes, a historic step forward. The Netherlands began to send back objects taken during colonial rule. And in 2018, France released the Savoy Report, a document that shook Europe and called for the return of African cultural heritage. At the same time, a new wave of activists has risen. People like Moazulu Diabanza walked into museums and challenged the idea that stolen objects should remain behind glass. Young people across the African diaspora use social media to expose injustice, to tell hidden stories, and to demand change. Their voices reach millions. The movement grows every year. It grows with anger, with hope, and with love for what was lost. Because for Africa, this is not just about artifacts. It is about dignity. It is about healing. It is about restoring the bond between people and their ancestors. And, as many elders say, our ancestors are not dead. They are waiting. And now, we return to the face we met at the beginning, the calm, steady face of Queen Idia. Her mask has traveled far. It was taken, sold, displayed, and argued over, but her story is a circle. What was taken still calls to go home. What was lost still remembers where it belongs. Her face still watches. Her spirit still speaks. Africa remembers her. And she remembers Africa. The land itself remembers everything. Benin City remembers the fire. Addis Ababa remembers the manuscripts. Kumasi remembers the gold that shined like the sun. The forests of Congo remember the sacred figures that once stood in their shadows. And the stones of great Zimbabwe remember the footsteps of their builders. Africa's treasures were stolen to erase her memory. But memory lives in the soil. It lives in the bronze. It lives in the manuscript. It lives in the spirit that refuses to die. Returning these objects is not charity. It is justice. It is healing. It is history finding its way home. And one day, when every piece returns to the place it was born, Africa will stand whole again.